Everybody wants to be safe, right? It's probably the most basic human instinct there is. And in a world with nuclear weapons, what could possibly sound safer than a perfect, impenetrable shield that could stop any missile? It seems like a no-brainer. But what if I told you that the very act of building that perfect defense could actually make the world a far more dangerous place? Today, we're going to get into that exact paradox, the strange and deeply counterintuitive logic of missile defense.
And look, to understand that this isn't just some abstract academic debate, you just have to look at this quote right here from Ankit Panda. What he's saying is that a fundamental assumption of American security, the idea that it only needed a shield against a small attack from a so-called rogue state, has just been blown wide open. That whole foundation is cracking, and it's forcing a complete rethink of everything. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to look at the simple, raw numbers that are driving this whole conversation. Then, we'll talk about the powerful, almost seductive promise of a perfect shield. From there, we'll dive into the real core of the problem, what's known as the defender's dilemma. And finally, we'll see how this whole situation is fueling a brand new, very scary, high-tech arms race.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate challenge, the thing that really brought this whole issue to a boiling point. And it all comes down to a simple but really serious numbers problem.
This is what really set the alarm bells ringing. These are images from a North Korean military parade, and what you're seeing are as many as 12 of their massive Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Every single one of them has the range to hit the U.S. mainland. This wasn't an accident. It was a very clear and deliberate message.
Now, contrast that display of force with this number. The entire U.S. ground-based mid-course defense system, that's the main shield for the American homeland, has exactly 44 interceptors ready to go. You don't have to be a math genius to see the potential mismatch here, and this is just the start of a very, very difficult numbers game.
And this is where the math goes from just being bad to being genuinely alarming. Because experts believe that each one of those big Hwasong-17 missiles could carry multiple independent warheads. So suddenly, it's not a one interceptor for one missile problem anymore. In theory, North Korea could launch enough warheads to completely saturate, to just overwhelm America's defenses. It's a strategy designed to make the shield irrelevant.
So, when you're faced with that kind of daunting arithmetic, the gut reaction is pretty straightforward, right? You just build a better, stronger shield. And that leads us to this decades-long quest for technological invulnerability.
And believe me, the U.S. has invested a staggering amount of money into this idea. You've got the GMD system we just talked about, then there's the Aegis system on ships using SM-3 interceptors, you've got the mobile THAAD batteries that are designed to hit missiles in their final moments. There are even these really ambitious proposals for a Golden Dome, a massive multi-layered shield to protect the entire country.
The big idea here is to create a defense in depth. Think of it like layers of armor. If an incoming missile somehow gets through one layer, the next one gets a shot at it. And the goal is totally intuitive. It's very appealing to make the nation invulnerable to attack, especially from countries like North Korea or Iran. Okay, so here's the billion-dollar question. What on earth could possibly be wrong with that? Why wouldn't any country want a perfect, 100% effective shield against nuclear missiles? It seems like the purest form of common sense, but this is exactly where nuclear strategy takes a very sharp and very weird counterintuitive turn.
And that brings us to the absolute core of this whole paradox, the defender's dilemma. It's this deeply unsettling idea that a purely defensive weapon can actually be seen as the ultimate offensive tool.
Now, to get our heads around this, we have to go back to the foundational logic of the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, or MAD. It's a grim name for a grim concept, but this doctrine is what kept the nuclear peace for decades. The logic was simple. Nobody could win a nuclear war. Because even if you launched a surprise attack, the other side would always have enough nukes left on submarines, in silos, on bombers, to launch an absolutely devastating retaliatory strike. So launching a first strike was literally suicide.
Okay, and this metaphor explains the dilemma perfectly. Imagine two people with guns in a really tense standoff. It's stable because neither one wants to get shot. But now, what happens if one of them suddenly puts on a perfect, unstoppable bulletproof vest? Well, all of a sudden, that person might be seriously tempted to shoot first because they know they can easily survive the single shot that comes back at them. The vest, a purely defensive item, has just turned them into the aggressor.
Let's just put this side by side to make it really clear. Without a shield, you have this fragile but stable system of deterrence. Everybody is vulnerable, and that vulnerability forces everyone to be extremely cautious. But
The moment one side gets a perfect shield, that stability completely collapses. A first strike, which was once suicidal, suddenly becomes a survivable, even logical strategic option. And for the other side, their entire nuclear deterrent has just been made useless.
This isn't some new idea that people just came up with. Policymakers have been wrestling with this for over half a century. In fact, it was so central to keeping the peace that back in 1972, the US and the Soviet Union actually signed the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. It was a landmark agreement to not build national shields, specifically to keep MAD in place. That consensus was shattered in the 80s with Reagan's Star Wars program. Then in 2002, the US pulled out of the treaty altogether. And now, today, with tensions rising with Russia and China, this old dilemma is back and it's front and center.
So this dilemma, it doesn't just exist in theory or in the minds of war planners. Its real-world consequences are actively fueling a dangerous, incredibly expensive, and maybe even unwinnable new arms race.
And this right here lays bare the brutal economics of this race. It is always, always, always cheaper and easier to build something that attacks than it is to build the technology to stop it. I mean, look at this example. A drone that costs maybe $10,000 can force the other side to use a Patriot interceptor that costs $1 million. Offense has a gigantic built-in cost advantage.
And those costs, they add up fast. To date, the United States has spent over $165 billion trying to develop this missile defense architecture. That is just an immense amount of money to pour into a technological race where the math is fundamentally stacked against you. It's a strategic choice to chase a goal that might not even be possible. So what do rivals like Russia and China do when they see the US building this ever more expensive, bulletproof vest? Well, they don't just throw their hands up and give up. They get to work on making that vest totally useless. They can just build more missiles to overwhelm it. They can develop super-fast maneuvering hypersonic weapons to just fly right around it. They can launch a bunch of cheap decoys to fool its sensors. Or they can try to outsmart it.
And this takes us to the absolute cutting edge of this new arms race. A recent report claimed that Chinese researchers have developed an AI algorithm that can predict an interceptor's flight path down to just 16 feet. The whole idea is to allow their hypersonic missiles to literally dodge the defensive bullet while it's in midair. The defense builds a taller wall, so the offense just builds a smarter ladder.
Now, what's fascinating is that official U.S. policy actually admits this reality when it comes to the big nuclear powers. The 2022 Missile Defense Review says it right there in black and white. Against Russia and China, the U.S. will rely on strategic deterrence. In other words, the old logic of MAD. The stated policy is not to build a shield that can stop their arsenals.
But, and this is the huge but, here's the central contradiction. The stated intent of the U.S. is to build a limited shield, but the technology itself doesn't care about intent. To Russia and China, this whole thing looks like a Trojan horse. They see a system being built today for North Korea that, they fear, could easily be scaled up and turned against their nuclear deterrence tomorrow. They can't bet their national survival on American intentions, they have to plan for American capabilities. And that just throws more fuel on the arms race fire.
And so, after all that, we are left with this profound and frankly deeply unsettling question. In the nuclear age, where does real safety actually come from? Is it in the endless, unbelievably expensive, and destabilizing chase for a perfect technological shield? Or is it found in the uncomfortable, reluctant acceptance of that fragile but stable balance of shared vulnerability? That, right there, is the defender's dilemma.